Welcome back, everyone. Oz here, and today I've got some r/TraumatizeThemBack for you all. You all seem to really enjoy this one, so hopefully you guys enjoy the few posts that I've collected to present for you all, like a raccoon sharing his treasures. NW342. Guy didn't like me eating at 7-Eleven. Blunt force traumatized them back. So a few years ago, my dad was in a bad accident and ended up in the ICU. I found out halfway through my EMT job at a rescue squad, so I ended up leaving early and showing up at the hospital in my uniform. I was also halfway through a busy 24-hour shift and was exhausted. Unfortunately, we found out my dad was most likely brain dead in the ICU, and we were waiting for test results to come back. Now, I hate hospitals. I hated hospitals before I became an EMT, and I hate going to them outside of work. I hadn't eaten in like 12 hours at this point and decided to run to a 7-Eleven a few miles from the hospital, the only food close by. I was also getting a bunch of stuff from my family who was at the hospital as well. So I go to 7-Eleven, grab drinks for everyone, and decided to get cheeseburgers for myself. Yes, I am fat. Keep in mind, I'm still in my uniform and look awful. This guy is standing behind me making comments to himself that I didn't hear and didn't care about. He then goes, "Shouldn't you know better than to eat that crap? You should know better with that job." I'm exhausted, on the verge of tears thinking about my dad, and was done dealing with the BS. I go, "Well, sir, I just got done with a 14-hour shift. My dad is most likely laying dead in his fucking deathbed. I couldn't give a rat's ass what I'm putting in my body." He looked a little flustered by this, and I had already paid by this point and walked out of the store before I could see his reaction. And yes, those cheeseburgers were delicious. Faux being 7-Eleven cheeseburgers. Personally, I'm more of a 7-Eleven tornado guy myself. I've had a couple days where it's just been a long day. And sometimes I just need some caffeine and walking by the food section and smelling all that greasy goodness, and it's just... Normally it doesn't speak to me, but oh boy. There are times where the exhaustion gets to you and that stuff sings to you, and you just gotta grab a couple, scarf them down either in the 7-Eleven or in the parking lot, or God forbid in your car, and, hope that God wasn't watching in that moment. Old-fashioned Raz. If you want to guilt trip me about not being in contact with my parents, I'm gonna tell you why I'm not. Blunt force traumatized them back. This happened many years ago when I was 20. I was working for a security company as a flex guard, meaning that I was assigned short-term to contracts and usually switched sites every few months or so. I had just started on a new site when this had happened. I was being trained on the new site, and we were right at shift change, so several people were in the back guard shack. I said that I needed to leave one time since I took the bus. The stop was a 20-minute walk away, and it was winter, so waiting an hour for the bus wasn't an option. One of the other guards asked me why I don't drive, and I explained that in addition to not having a license at the time, driving would be prohibitively expensive due to the cost of insuring a 20-year-old male driver. The other guard then asked why insurance would be so expensive, and I explained that young men cause more accidents than other groups, so our insurance rates are high. The quotes I got at the time were at least $450 a month, and I made $13 an hour. He started talking about insurance options and wouldn't really take no for an answer. I don't know if this is an American thing in general or specific to my area, but people here get weird about adults who don't drive. I was already getting irritated when he was pushing the issue. Then he asked why I don't just use my parents' insurance. For some context, I was essentially legally abandoned by my egg donor and her second husband when I was 17, about 2.5 years before this took place. This was still relatively recent at the time. I have extremely severe PTSD from what those two did to me. That means I'll need to be under the care of a psychology doctor for the rest of my life. For understandable reasons, I don't like talking about my family, especially not at work, and absolutely not with a stranger on top of that. I explained politely, but firmly, that using my parents' insurance is not and would not be an option. He kept pushing the issue anyways, asking, why not, when it's what lots of other young people do? I explained again that it just wasn't an option for me. He pushed even further, and I finally said, exasperated, I am no contact with my parents and cannot and will not be financially tied to them. Anyone with a speck of decency or common sense would know at that point to stop pushing the envelope. But not this guy. Wow, so you don't even call them at Christmas or on Mother's Day or Father's Day? That's cold. I can't even imagine doing that to my parents. He kept going along these lines and I snapped. I am not in contact with my parents because they beat me and psychologically tortured me to the point that I almost died when I was 17. And that's after they tried to kill me 3 times. So no, I don't call them on Christmas. I've never seen someone before or since shut up that hard. You could have cut the tension in that guard shack with a butter knife. It does seem that a lot of people are just blissfully unaware of the implications certain questions and answers can have. And this guy learned the hard way. I'm also really curious about the whole insurance thing because $450 a month, dude, like, were you like speeding? Did you have tickets? Did you get into accidents? Like, that is a rough insurance rate, buddy. Like, what did you do? Like, even with me having a not so clean driving record, my insurance rate wasn't even that much. And that's, that's me being insured at 20 as well. So I am deathly curious as to what would cause a $450 a month insurance rate. That seems excessive, buddy. I think you were getting screwed. Saving Tim. Hotel stories. Matched energy. I used to work the overnights as a hotel night auditor. It was a small independent hotel, not part of a chain. Over the years, I've had a few fun and funny stories to share. Not all of my stories are on topic, so I'll share as much as I can as appropriate for this subreddit. It was built in the 40s by a famous architect at the time. He built the Wart in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. People flowed in and out of the hotel to see the lobby and take pictures. We had people always trying to sneak into the basement to see the bar/restaurant that had been closed and was haunted. I often got offers of cash to let people in for a few minutes, but never did it. I love my job, and I didn't want to lose it. This very aggressive couple talked my coworker, Allison, into unlocking it at the end of her shift so they could sneak in on my shift. I saw them the CCTV and flipped the breaker for the main bar so that only the flickering emergency lights came on. I heard a blood-curdling scream and heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. A very scared couple burst in the lobby, breathing hard and looking terrified. They both breathlessly claimed to have seen someone walk into the room and turn out the lights. As an additional bonus story, a woman who was upset with me for not opening the gym early started working out in my lobby. She kept staring at me, so I pretended to be doing work while browsing Reddit. After a few minutes, she said, "My husband's a police captain in Houston, and he isn't going to be happy that another man is staring at my ass." I smiled and said, "My husband is going to find it hilarious." Fucking got him. So this specific story has actually led me to discover, well, I guess rediscover, Tales from the Front Desk. So maybe one of these days I'll give that one a shot and see if you guys enjoy it. I don't know, let me know in the comments what you all think. Prudent Act 9478. Traumatize my Corpo Boss. Traumatized. I, female, work in a semi-corpo company and have a boss, male, who is a tad micromanaging and hates when we want to work from home. Keep in mind that there is no upside of us working in the office. I was due to have my IUD changed, made all the precautions, and told my boss I will need to work from home as I am later going for a small medical procedure. He reluctantly agreed. As the day comes, all went fine, but I was not feeling well afterwards, so I decided to take a sick day for the next day, which was Friday. I called him to tell him so, which was apparently a big mistake. He went on how it's unprofessional and that I can't just take a sick day after my home office. That it looks bad and surely I'm not feeling that bad that I can't go to work. Also went on about explaining that sick days are not for when you are hungover, clearly his assumption, or when we are just feeling a bit down. Mental problems don't exist. And that it looks weird when someone takes a sick day before or after the weekend, only allowed to feel sick in the middle of the week it seems. So me, being me, I got pissed and calmly explained to him that I just had a several centimeters big device ripped out of my uterus and another one pushed in via my cervix. And that, frankly, I feel like shit. The silence on his side was pretty damn long, so I said that I'll be taking the sick day because that's what they're for. To which he only mumbled something like, "Sure, take all the time you need," and hung up. To be honest, scaring guys in this day and age by the extension of female reproductive organs is one of my favorite things. Yeah, that's just a shitty boss. Here's his employee has a surgery and immediately assumes that they're hungover. Yeah, buddy, that's fucked up. I do have a really embarrassing mistake I'd like to share when I was in a corpo environment, back when I was still an intern. One of the starting projects that we had to work on was essentially like an in-house time tracking thing that also allowed employers and managers to see schedules. I fucked up. Big time. And when I was developing the calendar, they gave little old intern me access to everyone's sick days and why they were taking time off. And they requested that, the calendar would be implemented. Granted, keep in mind, I was 17 at the time. I didn't know better. So when I implemented this calendar that they requested with the request that it would tell if someone has a sick day, I thought it would be cool to add the option that if you hovered over the person's sick day, it would tell you why they were sick. That was, that was horrible. That was really, really not good. So anyone at the company had direct access to why you were taking a sick day, which was a huge mistake for me. I was 17. I didn't know any better. I was an intern, and they put me on task to deal with sensitive information regarding employees. How was I supposed to know? They approved the feature, and then 6 months later, it was operational for 6 months company-wide. They came to me like, hey, this needs to be changed like 6 months ago. Bit of an oopsie-whoopsie on my part. Also, related to the main story but unrelated to this, I'm also pretty sure that when you get an IUD installed, and please correct me if I'm wrong, they don't give you anesthetics for that. I might be mistaken, but that's what I've been informed of. So yeah, she had every right to take extra time off. Guard Captorana. I probably said that wrong, but I'm sure you'll all correct me in the comments. A man shouldn't do the dishes. Just to add before the story, I don't know if this can be called revenge because it was done by an 8-year-old kid, but I'll go with this tag, the tag being petty revenge. So, as I stated before, this story is about my nephew and it happened when he was 8 years old. Let me tell you all about this kid because he's too damn smart. He's honest and doesn't let anyone lie, even if it's his parents. He has an amazing sense of justice too, so my family has a lot of stories about him. One of our favorites is when he came clean about gaming 5 minutes past the stipulated time when trying to kill a boss, and saying the deserved punishment of taking 5 minutes away of his gaming time the next day was too light, because he knew he did a bad thing on purpose, even though he knew it was bad. Anyways, my sister is married with a guy that comes from a pretty traditional family. Her in-laws are a bit of a pain in the ass if you ask me. They think my sister should be a stay-at-home mother and spend the whole time there in her house saying she should quit her job, one she's amazing at and the boss, FYI. They think it's terrible that my sister makes their son, her husband, do laundry, which is just putting the clothes in the laundry machine, mind you. So, one time, during one of their visits, my nephew was going to wash the dishes because it was his day. Back then, he washed the dinner dishes every 5 days or so, if I'm not mistaken. And mother-in-law jumped on the opportunity to say, a man shouldn't do the dishes. And my nephew, bless his heart, answered without skipping a beat, good thing I'm not a man, I'm a boy. Mother-in-law tried to berate my sister for this, but she was so giddy about how smart her boy was that it didn't even bother her. My nephew is now 12 and his sense of justice keeps traumatizing my sister's in-laws. I love this kid. Oh no, their grandson is woke, he's doing the dishes. Like, I always have the mindset of you do you with how you want to, run your family. If you want to run a traditional family, go for it. That's your choice. But if someone chooses that they don't want to be a stay-at-home mother, don't knock them for that. That's fucked up. Not to mention, also, they're providing their child a better life by having a 2-income household, because a 1-income household, nowadays, can't afford shit. And I'm guessing the in-laws are blissfully unaware of this fact. Honestly, nephew's actions aside, that's pretty much going to constantly give the grandparents a heart attack almost every time. I feel like secondhand embarrassment for the husband in this one, because that would really suck to have your parents show up and start dictating your wife's, livelihood. Hey, quit your job. Go be a stay-at-home mother. How dare you make my son do laundry? Bro is a grown man. If he can't wash his own underwear, then we got a problem. I don't know, maybe it's just too new age and modern to just simply assume that it's healthy for a couple to share household responsibilities. I don't know, maybe that's woke, apparently. Creatrix Anima. Don't ask if you don't want to know. Don't start none, won't be none. Way back in the very early 90s, I went on a trip with the school I had recently graduated from. I guess technically it was a class, but I was just going as a graduate. I had always wanted to go to this country and the opportunity came up. It was on this trip that I was able to witness the thing of beauty that is to follow. There were not a lot of us. I think there were 6 or 7 students total, not many at all. There were 2 professors who taught the class and a married couple who basically were doing what I was doing. They'd always wanted to go to that country as well, and their association with the college allowed them to do so. So, the main characters in the story are Guy, the only student guy on our trip, hence the name, and Greta, one of the women. Greta was probably 19 and your average sorority girl, pretty popular, outgoing, and I guess she could be a bit bitchy if she needed to be. Guy was 19 and had grown up in a very religious homeschooling household, and he really just didn't know how to interact with women from outside of that culture. For example, he appointed himself the guardian of the ladies on the trip because he was the man. He was several years younger than I was, and I certainly didn't want this kid telling me where to go and when to be back. The other woman agreed with me. He was a little weird because he didn't have the same understanding of pop culture as the rest of us. But our biggest issue with him was his arrogance and well-meaning, but annoying sexism. He didn't understand women at all, and didn't respect our autonomy. At one point, we were meant to leave on the bus by a certain time, and Greta made us late. Greta had stopped at a store, and Guy didn't think that she should have. Guy took it upon himself to grill Greta about what was so important that she would disrupt all of our schedules to go to a store. Greta, as well as the rest of us, tried to be tactful here. We tried to tell him to just drop it. We tried to tell him that it wasn't any of his business. I think the professors even began to pick up what we were laying down and suggested that maybe guys should let this one drop. Keep in mind, we're Gen X, so there are certain topics that we were less open about, and thankfully, we are today. But finally, Greta had enough of this crap. Do you really want to know why I stopped at the store? Yes. So Greta reached into her bag, smiled manically, and pulled out a box of tampons, lifting it up and displaying it as though it was the grand prize in a game show. Guy shut up at that point. This didn't need to happen, Guy. You started this shit and Greta finished it. Yeah, that guy probably remembers this for the rest of his life and is probably deeply ashamed by it. He's probably in his 50s now. God damn. I wonder if this still keeps him up at night, because goddamn, this would keep me up at night. Buddy. I feel bad because he did kind of want to be like, you know, the strong hero of the situation, but he definitely fucking overstepped just in general and was just being cringe. Like, I'm empathetic towards what he was trying to do. He was just trying to seem strong and like he was a reliable person, but buddy, 30 years ago, so my input doesn't matter, but time and place, man. I'd love to get some input in the comments on this, because this poor guy has probably spent the last 30 years just dealing with this. Good on Greta for putting him in his place. Old Mud Magic. Well then, he has never been really hungry. Don't start none, won't be none. My female Gen X true boomer mother and her boomer boyfriend and I were having dinner, and one of them mentioned my boyfriend not being able to join, being at work, and I said he wouldn't eat this anyway. See, there's a weird thing that boomers who are super poor still do, even if they aren't poor anymore. Remember, they were raised by the Depression-era parents who had literally nothing. I think of it like a who can suffer the most nobly exhibition that never ends. We were having boiled pork and egg noodles, seasoned with salt and pepper. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, by any means, but I know he would not eat it. So, her boyfriend says, well then he's never been really hungry. As if ever having been truly hungry means you will and must always eat any and everything ever offered. Because what if you're ever hungry again? Like I said, it's weird. Anyway, the TraumatizeThemBack part. I said, well, he's told me he remembers eating the paint chips off the wall as a kid because he was so hungry, so I don't know about that. Both of their faces just fell from proud smugness that had been plastered on them a moment before. They didn't say anything else about it. Ah yes, the suffering Olympics. I find this to be just wild because I've always heard the saying of like, oh, we want our kids to live better lives than we did. And then when you dare do, you're the devil and they gotta hit you with the, you don't know how good you had it. Back in my day, we had to make a hobo stew. You kids these days not knowing how difficult it is to tenderize a whole hobo. I don't know, the whole one-upping thing when their whole goal in life was to make life easier for their descendants seems just wild to me. Not to mention they've made things worse, but hey, at least their stock portfolios are doing good. Ain't much to do. Sir, I worked in a pediatric trauma unit. Petty revenge. There's a 4-lane US highway near my house that I take anywhere I need to go. Work, grocery store, kids to school, etc. After over a decade of living in my neighborhood and driving it every day, I've gotten pretty adept at knowing the vibe and flow of the road, when the lights turn, what traffic ahead will do, etc, etc. So, I'll wax and wane from 50 to 60 miles per hour. The speed limit is 55. Coast down hills to hyper mild to red lights. And I generally stay in the right lane doing this, unless I have to make a left turn or in situations I'll describe ahead. This has enabled me to, several times a month, play one of my favorite games, arrive at red lights at the same time, or even end up ahead of, in a line at the light, people who theatrically careen past me. Someone whips around me at 75 miles, it's always hilarious to either cruise normally or casually change lanes when I'm clear and end up 3 cars ahead of them at the red light they just accelerated to. One day, almost immediately after I turned onto the highway, I was very dramatically and theatrically passed by a boomer in an SUV adorned with a few prominent bumper stickers. "One big-ass mistake, America. The SEALs ended one threat to America and the other in November." And other lovely items in that vein. And I knew, based on the timing of the red light ahead of me, I just might have the most incredible luck and timing. For whatever reason, the moon and the stars aligned that day because 4 times in a row, I was able to casually pass him or end up directly next to him at a red light, 15 to 20 seconds after they'd arrived there. Now, for the bit to be complete, I have to make sure I don't change a single thing about how I drive normally, and to completely ignore the other driver. I've lost out on doing this a number of times because of that, but reacting to them totally invalidates the exercise. Still, after 4 times of meeting/being ahead of him, I admit my latent pettiness began to shine through, and that's what set him off. Watching me coast directly through a newly turned green light as he was just accelerating hard off the block. I zipped past him at 45 to 50 miles an hour because I knew the light cycle timing and I'd seen the cross streets were clear. And then I committed what was perhaps an even more egregious sin than being in front even though I drove slower. I smiled and waved at the guy as I went by. To add insult to injury, he got held up by traffic in front of him, so he changed lanes abruptly and pulled up behind me with an obvious lead foot. I'm sure the Germans have some kind of word for how I felt that day. And man, I felt it big time. Unfortunately for me, the driver felt it necessary to escalate his drama from not being in front when I drove faster by changing lanes to cut off another car and then waiting for me to pull up next to him at the following red light, leaving 50 to 60 feet of space in front of his car to do so. He rolled down his passenger side window and angrily gestured at me to roll down mine. When I obliged, he rattled off a series of expletives, suggested my driving skills were more in line with an elderly woman's, and so on and so forth. I gave him a second, just smiling. I'm an ER nurse by trade, and so his diatribe isn't anything that would be out of place in a mundane overnight shift. And then I interrupted him by saying, "Sir," loudly and repeatedly until he got out of breath enough for me to interject. "Sir, I worked in a pediatric intensive care trauma unit. Ever seen what happens to a 7-year-old when paramedics have to yank him out of a car with the jaws of life?" I gave him a short, 2-sentence, very graphic description of a case I'd seen that I occasionally still have nightmares about. After I saw that, I decided to drive more carefully. It took him a few seconds for him to comprehend what I said, as I think he was expecting me to join him in cursing or hollering. Then he paused for a moment, looked away from me, rolled up his window, idled the next 50 to 60 feet up to stop where he normally would have been if he didn't need to throw a temper tantrum, and then drove off at a fairly normal pace when the light turned green. Yeah, when I was like 16 or 17, I did this, and I've learned my lesson since then. I mean, thankfully I didn't get into an accident or cause any problems. I was just kind of a goober, and, yeah, the dirty looks you get ain't worth it, let me tell you what. At most, if you're lucky, you might shave off maybe 1 or 2 minutes off of like a, 20-minute drive. But in the end, it's not really going to do much for you. And you're just going to be seen as an asshole, and God forbid you piss off someone with a temper. That can be deadly. As someone who used to drive like a goober hooligan, trust me, it's not worth it. I find it embarrassing, though, that they're old in doing this, because normally most people, they get out of this phase when they turn around, 19 or 20. I know I did. And for those of you who are kind of young and figuring out driving, and you might feel you're invincible, you fully know your car, you got it all handled, Take this from someone who has quite literally a checkered past with driving. All it takes is one patch of loose asphalt, and your night's over. I've unfortunately seen it happen. You can be the best, most confident driver who understands every minute detail of their car, but nothing changes the road conditions and the unpredictability of it. You gotta drive carefully. Save it for the track. Hey, welcome to the outro. Don't forget this whole thing is basically brought to you by gamersupps. If you like caffeine, then I can't recommend gamersupps enough. Use code OZ at checkout to support the channel. And I do actually use this product. It's replaced all other sources of caffeine for me because I feel good. It doesn't have any of that extra stuff that a pre-workout blend might have. It's with a couple of the extra things to make it so you don't crash as hard. It's good. I like it. Personally, if you really want a good flavor, try the Soda Pressing Pear or even the Dragon Fruit Punch. Those two are my personal favorites right now.